She laughed at him for wearing dusty boots and asking about a $50,000 0 cents watch, until he said 5 quiet words that froze the entire store. What began as a smug dismissal turned into a global lesson in grace, grief, and power. And what Keanu Reeves did next, no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The boutique was pristine, tucked between 2 luxury fashion houses on Rodeo Drive. Inside, the silence wasn't just quiet, it was curated. Each glass case reflected warm amber lights from chandeliers that seemed more like sculptures than fixtures. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. Every surface gleamed. Every timepiece stood like a trophy, encased in its own shrine. Behind the central counter stood Marissa, dressed like she was part of the display. Her blazer was beige, tailored to perfection, a silk scarf tied delicately at her neck, diamond earrings glinting beneath her sleek ponytail. She moved like she belonged to the world of high margins and higher standards. Her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning for clients worth her time. She adjusted a velvet-lined tray of limited edition watches, glancing at her tablet to confirm inventory. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon. No celebrities, no regulars, just time ticking in a room built to pretend it could control it. Then the chime above the door sounded, a single, soft note. She looked up. A man walked in, motorcycle boots, faded jeans, a plain black t-shirt stretched comfortably across his chest. A scratched helmet dangled from one hand. A well-worn backpack hung off the other shoulder, the kind that had seen hundreds of miles and didn't pretend to be expensive. His long hair fell loose around his face, just brushing his shoulders. His beard was scruffy but clean. His posture relaxed. Marissa blinked once, slowly. Logan, her younger colleague behind a secondary display, leaned toward her. "Lost tourist?" he muttered under his breath. She didn't answer, but the slight curl at the corner of her lips said enough. The man stepped further inside, his eyes calm, moving from case to case with a kind of quiet focus. He didn't rush, didn't speak, just studied the watches like they were paintings in a museum. He walked with the kind of presence that didn't ask for permission, but didn't beg for attention either. Marissa straightened her blazer and crossed her arms. She watched as he paused in front of the Swiss collection display, some of the priciest items in the store, pieces they only showed to serious buyers, with clean shoes and heavy wallets. Still, the man lingered, eyes soft, thoughtful, almost reverent. Finally, Marissa stepped forward, her heels tapping softly on the wood floor. She stopped just behind him, her voice smooth and professional. "Those are exclusive models," she said. The man didn't flinch. He turned slightly toward her. "They're beautiful," he said. His voice was deep, calm, grounded. "Each one feels alive?" Marissa tilted her head. That wasn't the kind of thing most people said when looking at 6-figure watches. She let the silence hang for a moment before responding. "They're not for everyone," she said, letting the words land with just enough weight. The man didn't bristle. He just gave the smallest nod, then turned his eyes back to the display. Marissa remained beside him, arms folded now. She didn't move to offer help, didn't ask what he was looking for. She just stood there like a gatekeeper, expecting him to walk away once he realized he didn't belong. But he didn't. Instead, the man leaned slightly toward the glass, taking a closer look at one of the centerpiece watches. It was a platinum piece with a skeleton dial, gears and springs visible beneath sapphire crystal, held together by a frame of white gold. It wasn't just expensive, it was rare, one of 5 produced that year. Marissa cleared her throat. "That one's a limited edition, anniversary collection." He nodded. "I figured." She watched him closely. His tone wasn't ignorant or naive. It was observational, like someone who actually knew what he was looking at. She wasn't used to that coming from people in jeans and worn leather boots. He leaned closer. The movement's beautiful. You can see the whole thing working. It's like watching time breathe. That made her pause. Not because it was wrong, but because it was poetic. And unexpectedly so. Still, she kept her professional smile pinned in place. These are highly technical pieces. They require care, expertise, and of course, a significant investment. The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume. Still, he didn't take the bait. He gently tapped the glass with a single finger, not hard, just enough to gesture. "The crown, is that triple sealed?" She blinked. "It is," she answered automatically. He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Marissa shifted slightly. "Would you like to know the price?" she asked, adding a hint of amusement to her tone. He didn't look at her, just continued studying the watch. "Just curious," he said. She chuckled lightly, not from humor but from a place just north of mockery. "You know," she said, "most people ask about the entry-level models first." He turned his head, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "Why would I do that?" he asked, softly. His voice wasn't defensive. It was calm. So calm that it unsettled her. Marissa shifted her weight again, a little less certain now. Behind her, Logan glanced over, raising an eyebrow. She gave him the subtlest shake of the head, as if to say, "I've got this." Still, something about the man made her uneasy. He didn't act like someone trying to impress. He didn't stumble over his words. He didn't seem desperate to belong. He just was. And the more he stayed, the more she realized she didn't know what to make of him. Marissa tried again, her voice more clipped this time. "These timepieces aren't just accessories. They're heritage pieces. Investment grade. A lot of our clients pass them down for generations." The man gave the faintest smile. "That's the idea." She furrowed her brow. "Are you a collector?" "Sometimes," he said, "but not today." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't really care. Instead, she glanced down at his boots, then his helmet. Dust from the sidewalk clung to the edges of the soles. The leather was cracked from age and use. The backpack strap was fraying near the seam. The picture didn't match the product. Her voice softened into something between condescension and concern. "We also carry models that are more accessible, still elegant, but not quite so steep." He didn't take offense. He didn't smile either. He just looked at her. Not with anger, not with judgment, just stillness. "You don't think I can afford this one?" he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marissa blinked. The sudden directness caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, but the words got stuck somewhere between a denial and a deflection. "Don't take it personally," she said at last, her smile thin and distant. "It's just, this kind of piece isn't for everyone." He nodded again, slowly, as if absorbing more than just her words. "Interesting," he said simply. Behind the counter, Logan leaned to the side, pretending to organize a drawer but clearly listening. Keanu turned away from the platinum skeleton model and walked to the next case. Inside was a lineup of chronographs with blue dials and hand-stitched leather straps. He moved with quiet precision, his hands behind his back, his gaze slow and focused. Marissa followed him at a distance, unsure if she should keep engaging or let him wander until he left. Something about his composure made her uneasy. Not because he was rude, he wasn't. Not because he was out of place, not exactly. It was because he didn't seem to care what she thought of him. That made it hard to control the moment, and Marissa liked control. She thrived on predicting behavior, guiding outcomes. But this man, he didn't play the script. She glanced at the security camera overhead. The manager hadn't buzzed the earpiece yet, which meant he wasn't paying attention. She exhaled quietly and turned to walk back toward the counter. Behind her, the man spoke again. "This one's automatic, right?" Marissa froze. She turned back. Yes, caliber 3,135. Swiss movement. One of the most reliable. He nodded slightly. What's the power reserve? She hesitated. About 48 hours. He nodded again. That's what I thought. Her throat tightened. And for the first time since he walked in, she wondered, who exactly was this man? Keanu stood quietly at the display, eyes fixed on the platinum timepiece again. The skeletal design shimmered under the boutique lights, a symphony of mechanical parts ticking in harmony. He leaned in slightly, not touching the glass, just absorbing the detail like someone reading an old book. Marissa returned to his side, determined to reassert herself. She motioned to a lower tier in the display. If you're looking for something with that classic aesthetic, she said, these models have similar styling. Swiss-made, elegant, still excellent craftsmanship, but at a friendlier price point. He didn't respond right away. He kept studying the platinum piece, then asked softly, "What's the torque threshold on the main spring in this one?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "The torque threshold. For the main spring. I'm guessing around 10 millinewton meters." Marissa hesitated. Her smile twitched. "That's not exactly a common question." Keanu nodded gently. "It's not a common watch." Logan nearby chuckled under his breath. "Watched a lot of YouTube videos, huh?" he said, barely loud enough to be overheard. Keanu didn't react. He looked at the second hand of the watch as it glided around the dial, smooth and precise. "I like learning," he said quietly. "It tells me what matters to the people who made this." Marissa straightened her shoulders. She tried to keep her tone light but couldn't help the condescension bleeding through. "It's a beautiful piece," she said, "but also very rare. We usually show that one to long-time clients." Keanu finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "Do long-time clients ever ask about torque?" She was caught off guard again, and something about the way he stood there, calm, steady, not performing, settled her more than arrogance ever could. She stepped slightly back and motioned toward a simpler watch in the neighboring case. "This one's part of the same manufacturer line, less complicated, great for daily wear. Still mechanical. It might be a better starting point if you're new to high-end pieces." He tilted his head. "Who said I was starting?" Marissa opened her mouth but said nothing. Logan, now leaning casually on the back counter, tried to suppress another smirk. Keanu turned his attention back to the platinum watch. "The engraving on the rotor? Is that laser-etched or done by hand?" She cleared her throat. "Laser, I believe. These days most are." "Shame," he said. "The imperfections in hand engraving. They give a piece character. You can feel the human in it." Marissa offered a brittle smile. "Well, perfection is what many people come here for." Keanu nodded again, eyes still on the movement. "Perfection can be lifeless. Sometimes what makes something valuable is the flaw." Marissa didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't used to philosophical musings from someone who looked like he'd just stepped off a dusty road trip. She glanced at Logan, who was pretending to organize microfiber cloths, but clearly listening. Trying to regain control, she shifted her tone. "You seem to know a lot about watchmaking, hobby or profession?" Keanu's gaze never left the platinum dial. "Neither, just appreciation." "Appreciation," she repeated, as if tasting the word. He nodded once. "The balance wheel here, it's beautifully calibrated. You can feel it even through the glass. That level of precision isn't just about telling time, it's about respecting it." The sentence lingered in the air longer than Marissa expected. She gave a short, polite laugh. "Right, or maybe you just like how it looks." Keanu finally turned from the case, folding his hands loosely in front of him. "That too." Marissa tapped her nails on the edge of the counter. "Well, I have to say I wasn't expecting such detailed questions. Most people come in, ask how much it costs, then decide based on how shiny it is." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe most people shouldn't be buying this one." That reply hit harder than she wanted to admit. She quickly changed the subject. "Well," she said, motioning toward the far wall, "we have simpler pieces with automatic movements and lower profiles. Some of them are even collector's items, just not quite as exclusive. Still elegant, still very wearable." He glanced toward the direction she indicated, then looked back at her. "You think this one's out of reach for me?" Marissa stiffened. "That's not what I said, but it's what you meant," he replied gently. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He didn't sound offended. He didn't raise his voice, but his calm, unbothered tone left no room for denial. Logan couldn't resist. "Well, that watch costs more than your bike, man," he said, laughing. Marissa let out a breathy chuckle, too, hoping to diffuse the growing discomfort. "He's not wrong. You could probably buy 3 motorcycles for the price of that model." Keanu turned slightly toward them, his expression unreadable. "Maybe," he said, "but some things aren't priced in dollars." The room went quiet. A man browsing leather straps at the far end of the boutique glanced over. Even Logan looked away. Keanu turned back to the platinum watch. The second hand moved smoothly under the crystal. He followed it with his eyes for one full rotation before speaking again. "You see a price," he said softly. "I see a story. Every tick, every vibration. A human life measured in moments. That's not just money." Marissa felt something shift, a discomfort that came not from embarrassment, but from realization. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain control. "Look, I'm not trying to offend you, it's just, these pieces aren't casual purchases. Most clients who buy them are well-established, known collectors. They usually come in wearing something more refined." Keanu raised an eyebrow slightly. "Like a suit?" She nodded. "Or at least something that says they understand what they're buying." He let the word settle for a moment, then replied, "You don't wear understanding." Marissa opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Her confidence, once unshakable, now felt like it stood on a crack in the floor. Behind the counter, Logan whispered something to another staff member. Both of them smirked. They thought it was harmless, a little fun. But the energy in the boutique had already started to change. The silence between each word grew longer, heavier. Keanu placed one hand lightly on the glass, not to smudge, just to anchor. His eyes were still locked on the platinum model. "The movement," he said, "is almost silent, but if you listen close enough you can hear its rhythm, like a breath." Marissa frowned. "It's a machine." "Machines can have heart," he said, "especially when someone builds them with one." The back office door cracked slightly open. The store manager, Mr. Laramie, poked his head out for a moment but said nothing. He looked at the trio for just a second, then vanished again. Marissa didn't notice. But Logan did, and for the first time he stopped smirking. Marissa took a deep breath and tried again. "If you're shopping for a gift," she said, trying to regain the upper hand, "we have great mid-range models. Good value, but still quality. You could walk out with one today and still feel proud." Keanu turned to her slowly. "Do you think I'm not proud now?" She went quiet. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound insulted. He sounded steady, grounded in something far deeper than she could see. Marissa cleared her throat. "I'm just saying, there are options for everyone." He nodded slowly. "I'm sure there are, but I didn't come here for options." She blinked. "Then what did you come for?" He looked at her, eyes calm and firm. "Something timeless?" She didn't know what to say to that. He looked back at the display, folded his hands behind his back again, and simply stood there, not waiting for permission, not asking for approval, just standing, watching, listening to the quiet heartbeat of a watch no one thought he could afford. And for the first time since he walked in, the store no longer felt like it belonged to her. The boutique had grown quiet again. The few customers inside browsed without urgency, their shoes whispering against the marble floor. Keanu remained where he was, standing calmly near the center display case. He seemed undisturbed by the comments. If anything, he looked more thoughtful than ever. Logan took that as a cue. He walked over, resting an elbow on the glass as if he owned the place. His grin was casual, but sharp at the edges. "You know," he said with a little laugh, "we do have plastic ones too, great for timing ramen or laundry." Marissa gave him a warning glance, subtle but firm. Keanu looked at Logan and offered a small smile. "Plastic watches are useful," he said. "Sometimes the simplest tools are the ones we depend on most." Logan didn't know how to respond. He gave a half smirk and backed away, pretending to check inventory behind the counter. Marissa stepped forward again, as if to distract from the moment. She gestured toward another case farther along the wall. "We have some newer models in that section," she said quickly. "Lots of variety if you're still exploring your options." But Keanu's attention had shifted. He turned toward a separate case behind her. It was a tall, freestanding display cabinet with a mirrored back. Inside, under a soft spotlight, rested a rare moon phase chronograph. Its dial was deep midnight blue, accented with silver constellations, and its moon phase indicator displayed the lunar cycle with a small golden crescent. Keanu took a few steps closer. He didn't press up to the glass, he simply admired it from a respectful distance. "May I see that one?" he asked. Marissa followed his gaze, then hesitated. That piece was special. It wasn't technically off limits, but it was set aside for a high-end client who had mentioned interest. Nothing formal, no deposit, just a verbal maybe. But she didn't want him touching it. Not him. She crossed her arms. "That one's already reserved for a client," she said smoothly. Keanu looked at her, nodded once. "That's a shame. It looks like it tells more than time." The words landed gently, but they didn't pass through unnoticed. Marissa gave a short, practiced laugh. "Well, maybe next time." He didn't respond to the sarcasm. He stepped back and looked around the boutique once more, hands calmly folded behind his back. "Are you shopping for yourself?" she asked, voice light, but with an edge that sounded more like amusement than interest. He looked at her again. "No," he said. "It's a gift." Marissa raised her eyebrows. "Really? For who?" He paused. Just for a second. Then his voice dropped a note, softer but deeper. "Someone who reminded me why time matters." Marissa tilted her head, trying to read between the lines. His answer was too poetic for her liking, too vague to categorize. She preferred straightforward buyers, people who pointed, paid, and left. This wasn't that. "So," she said slowly, "someone who taught you a lesson, then?" Keanu looked at the moon phase watch again. "No," he said gently. "Someone who didn't have much time, but used what they had to make others feel seen." The words hung in the air like a soft echo. Marissa blinked, unsure what to say. Logan looked up from his post across the boutique, sensing the shift. Marissa's voice sharpened slightly, trying to ground the conversation again. "Well, it's a very rare piece," she said. "The movement is delicate. It's not something most people would choose unless they really understood horology." Keanu gave her a slight nod. "And do you think I don't?" She forced a smile. "It's just not the kind of thing you pick up on a whim." "I didn't," he replied. His tone remained calm, but there was a stillness behind it now, one that made Marissa feel like she was walking on glass she hadn't noticed before. She stepped back slightly. "Well, if you're shopping for a gift," she said again, voice lighter this time, "we do have simpler chronographs in the mid-range, less risky, more versatile." He turned to her slowly, his voice steady as ever. "Why do you keep steering me away from what I came for?" Her throat tightened. "I'm just trying to help," she replied. "Are you?" he asked, not with accusation, but with genuine curiosity. She couldn't answer. He looked back at the moon phase chronograph once more, eyes reflecting the soft light above it. "There's something about that piece," he said. "It doesn't just measure time, it honors it. The night sky, the lunar cycle, all of it reminds us how small we are, and how short life really is." Marissa said nothing. Logan, still watching from a distance, gave a dry chuckle. Deep stuff for a guy who walked in with a backpack and dusty boots. Keanu didn't even look at him. He simply continued speaking, softly. "I met someone who spent most of his life measuring days by hospital visits, who said he didn't fear death, but he feared being forgotten. He told me if he ever got better, he'd save up for a real watch, a grown-up watch, something that ticked with meaning." Marissa swallowed. The tone of the conversation had shifted entirely. She wasn't mocking anymore. She was just trying to keep up. "Well, never got that chance," Keanu added. "But I did." There was silence between them now, thick as velvet. A different customer in the back corner of the store paused their browsing and looked up. Marissa felt like she was standing in a different store now, one where her role had suddenly changed, and she no longer knew the script. She cleared her throat, struggling to keep her tone neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that, about the boy." Keanu offered a small nod. He didn't ask for anything. Didn't want a picture, didn't want to be treated like a fan. He just wanted to talk about time, about how it slips away, how it doesn't wait for anyone. "We shared lunch in my trailer. He asked me what I feared most." Marissa remained silent. Her arms had dropped to her sides now. She wasn't folding them anymore. "I told him I was afraid of wasting moments," Keanu continued. He smiled and said, "Then make them matter." A beat passed. "That's why I'm here," he said, "because time is all we really have, and sometimes the right watch isn't just a gift, it's a promise to remember." Marissa stared at him, her lips slightly parted, unsure what to say. The mocking edge that had been in her voice earlier was gone. Completely. Logan watched from behind the counter, now visibly confused. He looked at Marissa, waiting for her to reassert control. She didn't. "I didn't come to impress anyone," Keanu said, looking at the moon phase watch again. "I came to honor someone." A soft click echoed as he stepped back from the display. His posture, his expression, everything about him radiated calm purpose. Marissa, feeling a strange heat rising in her chest, finally spoke. Who was he?" she asked. Keanu looked at her gently. "Someone who reminded me why it matters how we spend our minutes, who we spend them with, and what we choose to remember." The front door of the boutique opened briefly, letting in a burst of outside noise before it clicked shut again. A couple entered, glanced around, then moved to the far corner without a word. But the energy in the room had already shifted, and they felt it too. Keanu took another step back, folding his hands behind him again. "You said that watch is reserved?" Marissa hesitated, her face flushing. I said that, yes. Is it really reserved?" She hesitated again. "No," she admitted softly. Keanu nodded. "Then I'd like to see it, if that's all right." Marissa moved slowly toward the display case. Her hands weren't as steady as before. She unlocked the case and carefully retrieved the moon phase piece, placing it on the presentation tray with a soft clink. Keanu stepped forward again. He didn't grab it. He didn't show off. He just looked at it like someone looking at a photograph of a memory they hadn't visited in years. "This," he said quietly, "is exactly what I came for." Marissa looked down, then up at him again. Her voice cracked just slightly. Would you like to try it on?" He shook his head. "No need." He looked at her, and though he said nothing more, the message was clear. He wasn't here for vanity. He wasn't here for approval. He was here for something that lived deeper than any of them had expected. The hum of the boutique was broken suddenly by the soft chime of the front door. Marissa turned her head instantly, her posture straightening with precision. The man who stepped in wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, polished leather shoes, and a platinum watch that flashed subtly beneath the cuff of his sleeve. He carried himself like someone used to being served. Marissa's entire energy shifted. "Mr. Hargrove," she called warmly, her voice rising like a songbird's. "We just received the new arrivals I mentioned. They're exquisite." Victor Hargrove gave a curt nod and moved toward her. She walked briskly to meet him, completely forgetting the tray in front of her. The moon phase watch remained between her and Keanu, but her attention was now elsewhere, utterly and unapologetically. Keanu stood silently, hands behind his back, not even watching her go. He simply looked back down at the watch, studying the faint shimmer of its dial beneath the overhead lighting. Marissa led Victor toward the rear cases, offering him espresso before he even sat down. She snapped her fingers for Logan, who quickly moved to assist. She slipped on a pair of white gloves and opened a display case, presenting the newest models like they were relics. Across the room, Keanu remained standing beside the central display. No one offered him anything. No one said a word. Two customers, a young couple by the entrance, glanced toward him. The man leaned slightly and whispered something to the woman. She looked at Keanu, then at the staff doting over Victor. Her brow furrowed. "That guy doesn't belong here," the man muttered under his breath. The woman said nothing, but she didn't disagree. Keanu's eyes never left the tray in front of him. After a long, quiet moment, he looked up and turned his head toward the counter. Logan was setting an espresso cup in front of Victor. Marissa stood close, laughing at something he said. Keanu waited patiently, then asked calmly, "Could I see the spec sheet for this model's power reserve?" Logan turned, surprised to hear his voice. "The spec sheet?" he repeated. "Yes," Keanu said, nodding gently. "I'd like to confirm a few details about the movement. Power reserve, anti-magnetism, case resistance." Logan chuckled. "They're behind the desk," he said casually. "For buyers only." Keanu didn't blink. He simply nodded, as if Logan had just given him weather information. "All right," he said. Then he went quiet again, his attention drifting back to the dial in front of him. The young couple by the entrance moved on, but they glanced over their shoulders as they passed, sensing the quiet imbalance in the room. Marissa didn't look back. She was pouring all her charm into Mr. Hargrove now, her voice bright and professional, her laughter just loud enough to be heard by everyone but one person, the man still standing quietly by himself. Keanu remained still beside the central case, his gaze returning to the moon phase watch resting in the center of the velvet tray. He leaned slightly forward, not to touch, but to observe. His posture was never aggressive, never demanding. He gave the piece his full attention, as if nothing else around him mattered. But Logan noticed that he hadn't moved on. He walked over, tone clipped. "Still thinking it over?" he asked, almost impatient. Keanu nodded. "I just wanted to understand the full reserve specs before making a decision." Logan huffed a breath. "Like I said, those sheets are for confirmed buyers." Keanu didn't flinch. "Understood." "You know," Logan added, gesturing toward a nearby wall display, "you might find something in the Sport Tech collection more in line with your style. Lighter models, easier maintenance." Keanu looked at him with calm eyes. "What makes you think this one isn't in line with my style?" Logan shifted awkwardly. "No offense, just..." "Well, this piece is handcrafted, limited edition, sapphire crystal, moon phase complication. It's not something people just browse." "I'm not just browsing," Keanu said. His voice wasn't sharp, but the weight behind the words was undeniable. Logan tried to soften the tension. "I mean, we just don't get many people asking technical questions unless they're trying to look the part, you know?" Keanu tilted his head. "Look the part?" "Yeah," Logan said, shrugging. "It's usually collectors. Watch guys, you know the type." Keanu offered a faint smile. "Maybe the type doesn't always wear a suit." Logan didn't respond. He stepped away, awkward now, unsure how to salvage the moment. Back near the rear of the store, Marissa was pouring a second espresso for Victor, who sat confidently, flipping through a digital catalog of new releases. She laughed at something he said, her voice now theatrical in tone. Victor glanced toward the front of the boutique, spotting Keanu standing alone. He raised an eyebrow and whispered something to Marissa. She smiled, then waved her hand dismissively. "He's just browsing," she said, loud enough for Logan to hear, but not loud enough to be heard by Keanu. Logan smirked and returned to her side. Keanu, still beside the display case, stood with a presence that didn't ask for attention, but refused to be ignored. The boutique had returned to its rhythm. Customers whispering, espresso machines steaming, displays clicked open and shut. But the energy had changed. One of the older clients sitting near the corner couch noticed Keanu and narrowed his eyes, studying him longer than the others had. Something about the man's posture didn't match the way the staff were treating him. Keanu finally took a slow breath and looked down at the watch again. "It really is beautiful," he whispered. Not to anyone in particular, just to the moment. The atmosphere inside the boutique had taken on a strange quiet. Not the curated, luxurious silence that made people feel special, but a heavier, more uncomfortable stillness that no one wanted to acknowledge. Keanu stood alone, hands lightly clasped behind him, facing the moon phase watch that had stirred something inside him. He wasn't bothered. He wasn't impatient, but he was clearly being ignored. Victor Hargrove, meanwhile, was trying on a gold timepiece with a matching bracelet. Marissa hovered nearby with the kind of attentive energy she hadn't shown all day. Her voice grew louder with every passing minute, a subtle reminder to everyone in the store where her priorities were. "You know," she said to Victor, "this particular model isn't even on the public catalog yet. I requested it specifically for you." Victor chuckled. "You always take care of me, Marissa." She smiled, beaming with pride, then cast a brief glance toward the front. Her smile faded just slightly when she saw Keanu still standing by the display, unmoved. She turned to Logan. "Why is he still here?" Logan shrugged. "He asked for the spec sheet, told him it's for buyers only." Marissa sighed under her breath. "Of course he did." Victor noticed the exchange. "Is there a problem?" She shook her head quickly. "No, not at all. Just someone a little over-curious." Victor followed her gaze. "Doesn't look like your typical client." Marissa tried to recover the moment with a soft laugh. "No, but he's interesting." Victor raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. He went back to admiring the watch on his wrist. A few feet away, Keanu finally turned from the moon phase display. He walked slowly, deliberately, over to the center of the boutique and stood near the espresso bar, where no one offered him a drink. He looked at Logan and asked again, his voice quiet but steady, "Is there someone I can speak to about the movement specs?" Logan didn't answer right away. He looked toward Marissa, who was now deliberately avoiding eye contact. Keanu waited. His silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was patient, still, heavy with a presence that refused to fade. Logan finally replied, "Like I said before, those are for buyers only." Keanu nodded again. "You did say that." He glanced once more toward the moon phase display, and then lowered his gaze to the tray with the platinum piece he had admired earlier. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, not sarcasm, just knowing. Someone near the entrance leaned toward the sales associate and asked in a hushed voice, "Is that guy someone?" The associate shrugged. "No idea, just some biker guy." But the older client on the couch continued to watch him. There was something about the way Keanu stood, about how he didn't react to the disrespect, about how he didn't need to. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't leave. He simply remained, and that was starting to unsettle people far more than if he had made a scene. Keanu remained where he was, unmoving by the tray. He didn't check his phone, he didn't tap his fingers or glance toward the exit. He waited. Marissa finally returned from assisting Victor, her heels clicking across the floor with practiced confidence. She'd already turned her attention back to business as usual, ready to reset the encounter and move on. But Keanu didn't allow that. He looked up as she approached. His tone was as gentle as ever. "I'd like to see that first watch again." She stopped. Her hands stiffened slightly. Then she offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, walking to the case with a controlled breath. Her fingers moved quickly but carefully, unlocking the display and retrieving the platinum skeleton model he had admired earlier. She set it on the tray without flourish, then stepped back, arms folded. The mood had cooled since her last interaction with him, but her guard remained high. Keanu stepped closer. He reached for the watch, pausing just before touching it, as if asking permission from the object itself. Then he picked it up, slowly, respectfully. He turned it in his hands with the care of someone handling a memory, not a product. His thumb traced along the crown. His eyes followed the path of the second hand, ticking across the translucent face. "This reminds me of something someone once told me," he said softly, "that a second can be a lifetime." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "A lifetime?" Keanu nodded. "For some people, it's the difference between goodbye and one more chance, between silence and a heartbeat." She tried to scoff, she tried to dismiss it, but something about the way he said it, quiet, personal, unpolished, made her falter. Her voice came out more defensive than she meant. "You sure you're in the right store?" He looked up at her, not with judgment, not with challenge, just clarity. "Are you sure?" he said. "You're in the right profession?" The words didn't sting because they were loud. They stung because they were still. Something in the air shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't announced, but a customer nearby, the older man on the couch, turned his head slightly. A young associate near the espresso machine paused mid-step. Even Logan, polishing a display mirror in the background, went still for half a second. Marissa stood frozen, her face stiff, lips parting but producing no sound. Keanu placed the watch gently back onto the tray, like returning something sacred to its resting place. Then he took a slow breath, and for a brief moment, the entire store felt like it had paused with him. Marissa stood still, her face locked in a neutral expression that barely masked the heat creeping up her neck. She tried to recover. "I didn't mean to be rude," she said, smoothing the edge in her voice. "It's just, not every day someone walks in and starts asking about moon phase complications and hand-engraved rotors." Keanu nodded once. "Then maybe every day needs to change." She blinked. Across the boutique, the old man on the couch sat forward slightly, watching with more interest now. He hadn't touched a watch since the conversation started. Keanu stepped back, allowing space between himself and the tray. His posture remained calm, his voice measured. "I visited a lot of places like this," he continued. "Some of them make you feel small the moment you step inside, not because of the products, but because of the people behind the counters." Marissa felt her stomach knot. Keanu didn't stop there. It's easy to treat people with kindness when they're dressed like a CEO or dropping a name. The real test is how you treat the ones who don't need to prove anything. Marissa swallowed hard. "This is a luxury space. We have a certain clientele." Keanu looked at her, eyes steady. "I'm not asking for less than luxury," he said. "I'm asking for more than performance." Logan, now frozen by the far wall, glanced toward the back office. The manager hadn't stepped out, but Logan had the distinct feeling that someone was watching. Marissa let her arms drop to her sides. She didn't speak. Her usual defenses, charm, posture, tone, felt brittle now. Keanu turned his attention back to the platinum watch. The store fell back into silence, but it wasn't the curated kind anymore. It was the kind that came when people were listening. After a moment, he looked at her again. His expression was calm, but there was something behind it, a deeper awareness that couldn't be ignored. "I didn't come here to be right," he said. "I came here for something meaningful." Marissa barely nodded. He gestured gently toward the watch. "This was made by people who care about every gear, every hand, every invisible force that keeps it moving. Shouldn't the people selling it care just as much about the person holding it?" That landed harder than anything else so far. Marissa took a step back, not out of fear, but out of the quiet realization that she had never thought about it that way. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply waited. And for the first time since he walked through the door, Marissa saw him not as a customer, not as an inconvenience, but as someone who understood what she had been pretending to. Marissa's silence lingered, stretched thin across the boutique like a thread no one wanted to pull. The tray in front of her still held the platinum watch, untouched since Keanu had placed it back down. Its polished surface reflected both the warm lighting above and the tension standing between them. She finally broke the silence. I guess I've just been trained to spot serious buyers quickly." Keanu looked at her, gently. "That's not the same as judging them." Her lips parted to reply, but no words came. Behind her, Logan shifted uncomfortably and busied himself with a polishing cloth that didn't need use. Two clients near the back pretended to study the men's collection, but kept their ears open. "You asked me earlier," Keanu said, "if I was shopping for myself." She nodded. "I'm not," he repeated. "But I also didn't come here by accident." He turned to the case one more time, eyes falling on the moon-phased watch. Then he returned his focus to the platinum piece in front of him. "I came for a reason." Marissa stepped closer to the tray, lowering her voice slightly. "Is it someone's birthday?" Keanu's gaze remained on the watch, but his voice dropped into something more personal. "No," he said. "It's something else." Another pause. Then he looked up and said, "I met a boy once, not long ago. He was young, maybe 10 or 11, but you'd swear he had the wisdom of someone twice my age." Marissa didn't interrupt. "Had a condition," Keanu continued. "Rare, terminal, but he didn't want attention. He didn't want a photo. He just wanted to talk." Now the store was still again, not just quiet, but motionless. The two clients at the back slowly turned their heads. Even Logan, for all his awkwardness, was listening. Keanu spoke with calm restraint, like someone walking a path they'd traveled in their thoughts many times. "McKee told me time scared him, not because it was running out, but because most people waste it. He said adults act like they'll have all the time in the world, until one day, they don't. But he didn't want to be remembered for being sick. He wanted to be remembered for caring about time." Marissa blinked. She wasn't looking at the watch anymore. "Who'd told me," Keanu said, "that if he ever made it out of the hospital, he'd save every penny to buy a real watch. Something that mattered, not for the brand, not for the price, just for what it represented." His voice grew quieter. "Hell didn't make it." For a long moment, no one moved. The ticking of the boutique's wall clock could suddenly be heard. Keanu looked down at the tray once more. "So, I thought I'd buy one for him anyway, and leave it with his parents. A reminder that his time mattered, even if it was short." Marissa's throat tightened. Her posture loosened. She reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware that she'd been staring. The man in dusty boots, with a motorcycle helmet and a quiet tone, had just shifted the entire meaning of the space they stood in. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "Neither did I." He looked at the watch one more time, then met her eyes. Not with superiority, not with anger, just kindness. And in that moment, Marissa finally realized she wasn't dealing with a man who came to buy status. He came to honor something no price tag could ever capture. Behind the mirrored wall at the rear of the boutique, store manager Randall Laramie stood with his arms crossed, watching the floor quietly. His office was a sleek glass pod, elevated slightly above the sales floor with a one-way mirror facing the main displays. From here, he could monitor every client interaction without being seen. It was his favorite vantage point, not for power, but for control. Randall wasn't a flashy man. He didn't care about status symbols as much as consistency. He expected his staff to perform with excellence. He had hired Marissa because she could close a sale with her tone alone. Logan, though younger and cockier, knew how to flatter clients and move units. Randall didn't mind their confidence, he just wanted the numbers. But as he watched the interaction unfolding between Marissa and the scruffy man in boots, something started to bother him. It wasn't what the man was doing, it was what he wasn't doing. He wasn't posturing, he wasn't demanding attention, he wasn't flexing knowledge to feel superior, but he was still commanding the space, quietly, firmly, with purpose. Randall tilted his head. He saw the way Marissa rolled her eyes when she thought no one was watching. He saw Logan smirking from the back counter. Most of all, he saw the subtle changes in the other customers, how their curiosity had started shifting toward this unexpected man. And yet, Randall didn't recognize him. He didn't look like a regular, didn't fit any high-profile client profiles they had on file. No assistant, no driver, no appointment. But still, something about him pulled focus. Back on the floor, Marissa had returned to the display with the platinum watch. She stood stiffly, trying to regain her usual rhythm, but something about Keanu's earlier words had left a dent. She gestured to the price tag and spoke a little louder than necessary. "You know, this piece could feed a family for a year." Keanu glanced at her, then looked back down at the watch. His voice was soft but firm. "Some families don't have a year." The words landed like a stone dropped in a still pond. No anger, no sharpness, just truth. Marissa faltered. Keanu's gaze remained on the hands of the watch. "That's the thing about time," he said. "It doesn't care about money. It doesn't stop for guilt. And it doesn't ask permission before running out." Randall narrowed his eyes. He had seen thousands of people walk into this store. Most of them either wanted to be noticed or wanted to disappear behind their wealth. But this man didn't seem to need either. He stood like someone who had already learned the lesson the watches were trying to teach. And that made Randall uncomfortable. Marissa stepped back slightly, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle in the boutique's heavy silence. "Well, either way, it's not something most people would casually walk in to buy. It's aspirational." Keanu didn't respond right away. He just ran a finger gently around the edge of the display tray, the motion slow, thoughtful. "I didn't walk in casually," he said at last. "I walked in because someone mattered to me." The words came without effort, but their weight settled across the space like fog. A young man near the corner display glanced over again. His expression had changed. He wasn't just curious anymore. He looked embarrassed for having ignored what was happening. Randall, watching from the mirrored office, was now fully alert. He leaned closer to the glass, trying to read more than just body language. There was something unusual about the man. Not the clothes, not the demeanor, but the effect he had on the room. Randall had trained his team to control the energy of the boutique, but today they were reacting, not leading. He picked up his phone, quickly pulling up the camera feed from another angle and zooming in on the man's face. Still no recognition, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he should know him. Back on the floor, Logan reappeared with a clipboard in hand, trying to interrupt the moment with levity. "Marissa," he said, loud enough for Keanu to hear, "did you want me to pull the budget-friendly line sheets? Might help us not waste this gentleman's time." Keanu didn't flinch. He simply looked at him and said, "Time only gets wasted when we forget why it matters." Marissa closed her eyes briefly, clearly uncomfortable now. "Logan, that won't be necessary." But Logan wasn't done. I mean, I get it, sentimental value and all, but if this is about a tribute, there are other ways to show it that don't cost 35 grand. Keanu turned toward him fully now. His posture remained relaxed, but his presence was undeniable. I didn't ask for your suggestions, he said, and I don't need your approval. Logan's smirk faded. Keanu looked back at the tray. This isn't about price, it's about meaning. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe you've been selling watches too long without ever learning what they're for. The words didn't sting because they were loud. They stung because they were true. Even Marissa stepped back then, saying nothing. Randall stood frozen in his office. He didn't know who this man was, but he was no ordinary customer. He picked up his headset and clicked the internal mic, speaking only to Marissa. "What's going on with that guy?" he asked. Marissa paused, then quietly replied, I don't know yet." Randall frowned. "I think you need to find out." And with that, he set the headset down and continued watching, this time not as a manager, but as someone who sensed he might be witnessing a mistake in real time. Marissa approached the tray again, more slowly this time. The cool confidence she had worn earlier had faded. She now moved with caution, as if aware that each word she spoke could be another misstep. Keanu hadn't raised his voice once, but somehow his calm responses had unsettled her more than any outburst could have. Brunette snorted. She looked down at the platinum watch, then up at him. "You've clearly thought a lot about this," she said, attempting a more neutral tone. Keanu nodded. "Time is the one thing you can't buy more of. That makes it worth more than anything else you sell in this store." She didn't know how to reply to that. Behind the mirrored glass, Randall Laramie continued watching. He'd stopped checking reports. His fingers rested against his lips. He had begun the day thinking about targets and quotas. Now he was wondering how this situation had spiraled without a single raised voice. On the floor, Logan had backed off, finally sensing that his jokes weren't landing anymore. He returned to the espresso counter, but he glanced back now and then, as if watching something unravel that he didn't understand. A young couple near the leather strap display whispered to one another. "I think that's Keanu Reeves," the woman said quietly. "No way," her partner replied. "Here?" The woman squinted. "I'm serious. Look at the way he's carrying himself, and his voice." Keanu remained focused on the watch, unaware or unconcerned with the attention. Marissa, clearly rattled, reached for the tray, intending to move the watch back into the case. But Keanu gently stopped her with a soft gesture. "May I see the movement again?" Thea was unable to move her hands. She paused, unsure whether to comply. "It's a see-through back," he said calmly. "I'd like to see the rotor engraving." After a moment, she nodded and turned the watch over, holding it so the transparent case back faced him. The rotor, decorated with faint etching, gleamed under the light. "Is that laser or hand-engraved?" he asked, still watching it closely. Marissa hesitated, then admitted, "Laser." He nodded, just once. "That's a shame. The older models had hand engraving. Less perfect, more personal." Marissa didn't argue this time. She just held the watch and waited. Keanu's voice softened. "When machines are made with love, you can feel it. Same with people." The phrase landed harder than she expected. Her arms dropped. She placed the watch back on the tray without another word. Keanu looked at her, his tone even but heavy with meaning. "Beautiful machines deserve to be treated with respect," he said. "Don't you think?" Marissa swallowed, caught somewhere between shame and realization. Oh, he wasn't talking about the watch anymore. And for the first time since he stepped into the boutique, she wasn't sure she wanted to know who he was. She only knew that she had misjudged him. And by the time she realized it, the rest of the store was watching too. Keanu leaned forward slightly, picking up the platinum watch once more with care. He turned it in his hands, his fingertips resting on the lugs, then on the transparent caseback. The motion was fluid, gentle, as though he were holding something fragile, not in its construction, but in its meaning. He studied the rotor under the light, then glanced toward Marissa. "The base plate," he asked. "Is it hand-polished or machine-finished?" Marissa opened her mouth, but no words came. The question wasn't one she heard often. In truth, she didn't know the answer. He waited patiently. "I believe it's machine-polished," she said, uncertain. Keanu turned the watch slightly, peering deeper into its movement. He said. "Strange. The anglage looks asymmetrical in some corners. I thought that only happened in hand finishing." Marissa looked caught. It could be a hybrid process. He nodded again, not challenging, just observing. That would make sense. She felt a heat rise in her chest. Her cheeks flushed. She had sold hundreds of watches over the years. She could talk in circles about sapphire crystals and tourbillon escapements, but she rarely met anyone who understood the craft beneath the conversation. Keanu tilted the watch toward the light again. "Do you know if this balance spring is made in-house or sourced?" Marissa tried to smile. "We typically say proprietary components." Keanu raised an eyebrow, still watching the movement. "That's a diplomatic answer." She let out a soft exhale, trying not to appear flustered. Do you work in the industry?" He looked up at her with calm eyes. "No, just someone who respects what time means." The words weren't arrogant, they were honest, and that was what made them harder to stand in front of. Behind them, Logan scoffed from the espresso counter, where he was wiping the same cup for the third time. "Are you buying, or are you just here to play philosopher?" Keanu looked over at him without malice. "Depends on who's listening." The boutique quieted again. The older gentleman on the couch let out the faintest breath through his nose, somewhere between a laugh and a nod. Marissa turned toward Logan. "Not helpful." Logan shrugged, clearly irritated that the floor's energy had shifted away from him. Keanu returned his focus to the watch. "Most people think these machines are about power, precision, wealth, but the truth is, every one of these is a promise, a silent one. Every tick says, 'I'm still here. I'm still moving forward.' And if you listen carefully enough, you start to believe it." Marissa was silent. The boutique, too, seemed to lean in closer. Even Logan stopped wiping. And somewhere behind the mirror, Randall Laramie slowly sat down in his chair. Not to relax, but to prepare. Because something was happening, and it was no longer under his control. Marissa stood across from Keanu, her confidence shrinking by degrees with each question he asked. She had prided herself on knowing the basics and faking the rest with polish and charm. But Keanu wasn't just a watch enthusiast. He was cutting past every surface detail and diving straight into the soul of the timepiece. And worse, he wasn't doing it to show off. He wasn't trying to embarrass her. That's what made it more disarming. She tried again to recover her footing. "Well," she said, motioning vaguely toward the display, "people don't usually ask about baseplate finishes or in-house springs. They ask about water resistance and color options." Keanu gave a soft smile. "Because most people are taught to admire from a distance, but craftsmanship lives in the details most eyes never see." He set the watch back down and gently rotated the tray so the case aligned perfectly with the display. "That's what time teaches us," he added. "The quiet stuff is what lasts." Marissa's throat tightened. "You really don't work in the industry?" "No," he said. "I've just spent a long time thinking about what we choose to value, and how much of it disappears before we even realize it's gone." Logan, growing impatient, walked back over. "Okay, so let me guess," he said. "You're a poet, or a retired engineer, maybe a watch blogger who gets kicks out of testing salespeople?" Keanu looked at him calmly, Does it matter? Logan laughed under his breath. Well, if you're not buying anything, then yeah, kind of. Marissa turned sharply. Logan, stop! But Keanu didn't take offense. He looked at Logan and said, what if this isn't about buying something? What if it's about remembering someone? That silenced even Logan. Keanu leaned over the tray once more. Most people see a watch and think of what it costs. I see a movement and wonder whose hands assembled it, who spent hours making sure it wouldn't lose half a second after 10 years. That's not business. That's human. Marissa was no longer trying to fight the feeling rising inside her. Guilt, embarrassment, something deeper. She couldn't name it yet. Keanu turned to her once more. I've been to places where a watch is a status symbol, a conversation starter, a way to say, I'm more than you. But the boy I met, the one I told you about? He paused. His voice softened. Ellen had wanted a watch because he was afraid he wouldn't have enough time, not because he wanted to flash it, not because he wanted to impress anyone, just because he wanted to hold something that promised more time, if only in spirit. No one responded. The boutique had grown heavier, not tense, but reverent. For the first time in her career, Marissa wasn't trying to sell. She was trying to understand. The silence hung thick in the boutique, stretching across glass cases and polished floors, heavier than any luxury brand could manufacture. Logan had retreated again, this time without a word. He leaned against the far counter, fidgeting with a stylus that had no reason to be in his hand. His posture slouched in quiet defeat. Marissa, meanwhile, felt something unravel inside her. Not from being corrected or shown up, but from realizing how little she truly understood the products she sold every day. She had memorized all the right specs, learned how to upsell complications, how to reference exclusivity with a smile, but she had never once talked about time like it mattered beyond the dial. She looked at Keanu, really looked at him now, not as the man with the backpack, not as the customer she had silently judged the moment he walked in, but as someone who understood something she hadn't. She lowered her voice. Why this watch? Out of everything here, why this one? Keanu glanced at the tray and gave a soft smile. It's clean, honest, mechanical, but not overdone. It doesn't try to impress, it just works. Quietly, constantly, and if you pay attention, it tells you everything. He turned it over in his hands again, slowly tracing the edge of the crown. Just like the boy did, he added quietly. Marissa's chest tightened. She felt her professional facade crack one more time. There were tears in her eyes, barely forming, but she blinked them away before they had the chance to fall. Keanu gently placed the watch back on the tray. He stood upright, letting his hands fall calmly to his sides. I don't need a watch to say something about me, he said. I need it to say something about someone else. A young man near the display cases had stopped pretending to shop. He stood still, hands in his coat pockets, eyes trained on Keanu like he was watching a man perform heart surgery with words. Behind the mirrored wall, Randall Laramie still hadn't moved. But his hand hovered near the intercom, no longer with the intention to intervene, but just to hear better. Marissa stepped forward. Her voice was soft. I'm sorry, she said. Keanu gave a small nod. You don't need to be. She looked down at the tray, then back up at him. Would you like to see any others? He shook his head. No, this is the one. She glanced down at the piece, then gently folded the tray cover closed. Her voice was quieter now, more grounded. I'll get the paperwork started. Keanu paused, then looked at her. Actually, before you do, Marissa waited. He said, I think there's one more thing I need to say. Not about the watch. About how I was treated. She held her breath, and the boutique braced for whatever was coming next. Because for the first time, they all knew they had misjudged someone. who saw more than time. The boutique remained still, every sound dulled by the weight of what had just been said. Keanu stood beside the display tray, his eyes returning to the platinum watch as if nothing else in the room mattered. His presence was unchanged, steady, calm, but everyone around him had shifted. Marissa wasn't the same. Logan was silent. Even the ambient music playing overhead seemed to retreat into the background. Keanu looked up, voice quiet but unmistakable. "I'd like to purchase it." Marissa blinked, unsure she heard him right. "The platinum model," he said. "This one?" She hesitated. Then, without thinking, the words came out too sharp. "Seriously?" The moment she said it, she regretted it. Her voice had cracked just slightly, a reflex of disbelief more than cruelty, but it still cut the air. Keanu didn't react. He simply nodded. "All right," he said. He reached behind his back and pulled out a slim, black leather wallet. No show, no platinum card held high, no effort to impress. He opened it, removed a card with a gentle slide of his fingers, and placed it on the tray beside the watch. Marissa stared at it. His name was embossed cleanly into the matte finish, the type of card that needed no explanation. She cleared her throat, reaching for it with uncertain fingers. "Of course," she said. I'll begin the processing." Her voice had dropped an octave, quiet and hesitant. She didn't dare look over at Logan. She didn't want to know if he was watching. Keanu continued watching the watch, hands now folded again in front of him. As she moved toward the register, she asked the usual question. "Will this be a gift?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." There was something final in his tone. She glanced back over her shoulder. "A birthday?" He shook his head once. "No." Marissa paused, then turned fully to face him again. Her voice came out slow. "Then, what kind of occasion is it?" Keanu looked up at her, eyes steady. "A goodbye?" That word hit harder than she expected. It wasn't just a reply. It was a door closing. Marissa swallowed hard. She couldn't bring herself to ask anything more. She turned back to the register and began scanning the sale into the system. Her fingers moved slower than usual. Each field felt heavier to type. Every click of the keys echoed in her ears. She felt watched, not by her coworkers, not by the customers, but by her own conscience. She finished entering the model number and turned back toward him. "Would you like it gift-wrapped?" "Yes," he said. "Silver paper, dark ribbon, if you have it." She nodded without asking why. Behind her, Logan moved to the back of the store without a word. He had nothing left to say. Keanu stood waiting. He didn't check his phone. He didn't glance around the store. He simply stood still, present, respectful, like he wasn't waiting to complete a purchase, but to close a chapter. Marissa carefully wrapped the watch box in layers of soft silver paper. She tied it with a dark navy ribbon from the drawer beneath the counter, the closest they had to black. Her hands moved methodically, but her thoughts felt jagged and disjointed. She was trying to appear composed, but something in her chest was still catching up to the moment. She didn't know who the goodbye was for, but the way Keanu had said it, the weight in his voice, the pause afterward, told her it wasn't something casual. It wasn't a business transaction. It was something sacred. When the ribbon was tied, she slid the box across the counter. He stepped forward and accepted it with both hands, holding it with the same reverence he'd shown the watch itself. She couldn't help herself. Her voice was softer now, more human. I hope it means something to whoever receives it." Keanu looked at the box for a long moment, then met her eyes. "It already does." She nodded slowly. He began to turn, then stopped, glancing down at the silver box again. "I should tell you why I chose this one," he said quietly. Marissa stood still. Keanu placed the box gently back on the counter and rested one hand on top of it, as if grounding the story. "There was a boy," he began, "a few years ago. I met him during filming. one of those rare requests where a child facing the end doesn't ask for Disney or a sports star, he asked to visit a movie set. She didn't interrupt. Neither did anyone else in the store. Ellie didn't want anything, Keanu continued. No selfies, no autographs. He just wanted to talk. We spent lunch together. He was quiet but deep. He told me that time scared him, not because he was dying, but because most people waste it while they have it. Keanu looked down, told me if he ever got better, he'd save up to buy a watch. A real one, not for what it said about him, but for what it said about time. Marissa felt her throat close again. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Hell never got the chance, Keanu said. But I think about him often, about what he said, about how many minutes we take for granted. He slid his hand away from the box. So I'm buying the watch for him anyway, leaving it with his parents. A promise kept in his name. Marissa's lips parted, but she couldn't speak. Across the store, Logan had stopped moving entirely. One of the customers nearby placed a hand over her mouth. Keanu gently picked the box back up, his hand steady. Some people live a long time and never make an impact, he said. Others live a short time and change everyone around them. He gave a faint smile. Elle reminded me that time matters. So now, this does too. Then, without another word, Keanu turned and walked toward the door. And for a moment, it wasn't just Marissa who was silent. The entire store held its breath, watching a man carry something far heavier than a gift. The silver box sat on the counter between them like a secret that had finally been spoken aloud. Marissa, still clutching the ribbon tails in her trembling fingers, hadn't moved since Keanu finished his story. The hum of the display lights overhead, the soft tick of a distant wall clock, those were the only sounds that dared intrude. Keanu glanced at the polished floor, then slowly back up to meet her gaze. "There's more," he said gently. Marissa nodded once, eyes wide, signaling him to continue. Her posture had changed. Gone was the defensive confidence she wore like armor. Now she stood like someone aware they'd missed something important, something human. "It was during a long shoot," Keanu said. "We were filming in the desert. The days were brutal, the kind that made you question why you ever said yes to the role. But that day, my manager told me someone special was visiting. A boy named Elijah, 12 years old, terminal cancer." He paused, letting the name settle. Elijah didn't want a tour. He didn't want to meet the whole cast. He just asked to have lunch with me. Said he liked quiet. Said he liked people who didn't talk too much unless it mattered. Keanu gave the faintest smile at the memory and sat across from me with this little paper notebook. Not an iPad, not a phone, just paper. He said he wanted to ask 3 questions. Marissa didn't breathe. The first was, "What's the most important thing you've learned in your life?" I told him that love without presence is just noise. That being there, fully, is all we really give each other. Keanu exhaled slowly. His voice remained even, but every word carried weight. The second question was, "Do you know how many days you've been alive?" I laughed and said no. He said he'd been counting his each morning since he got sick. Said the number felt like treasure now. Keanu's eyes shimmered just a bit, but he continued. And the last question. He asked what kind of watch I wore. I said I didn't know the brand. I didn't care much about status or design. He nodded and said, "Me neither. I just hope someday I have one that lasts longer than I do." Marissa's hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles white. "Elijah didn't get that chance," Keanu said softly. "He passed away a month later." He turned slightly, not to shield himself but to slow the rising emotions behind his voice. I reached out to his parents a few months afterward. Sent them something he'd left behind on set, a notebook he'd forgot. Inside, he'd written quotes he heard from people he admired. I didn't expect to see mine in there. But he wrote down what I told him about love and time. Keanu rested his hands on the box again. That's why I'm buying this watch. For Elijah. For his parents. So they'll know someone remembers. That their son mattered. The silence around them wasn't awkward now. It was reverent. Even Logan, who had leaned against the back counter with a smug expression minutes earlier, now looked like he wanted to disappear. The silence didn't end with words, it ended with action. Marissa slowly resumed wrapping the box, but now her movements were gentler. Her fingers no longer trembled from embarrassment or defensiveness. They trembled with something deeper. Regret, humility, and awe. She placed the watch inside the cushioned velvet, adjusting it with unexpected care. Her hands, so used to performing this task with robotic precision, now treated it like a ritual. Keanu stood quietly, letting her work. When she finally tied the ribbon and slid the box into a discreet shopping bag, she looked up at him. Her voice, when it came, was softer than he'd heard all day. "I didn't know," she said. Keanu met her gaze. "Most people don't, and that's okay. But when you do, you start seeing time differently." She nodded slowly. "It's not just about what it costs." "No," Keanu said. "It's about what it means." Behind them, a couple who had been browsing quietly stepped away from the shelves, clearly moved. The woman whispered something to her partner and wiped at her eye. Logan, who had been frozen in place, retreated behind the front desk, his face pale. The smirk he once wore was nowhere in sight. Then came the unexpected sound, slow, deliberate steps from the back office. Mr. Laramie, the store manager, emerged from the mirrored glass doorway, his expression unreadable at first. He walked straight toward Keanu, paused in front of the counter, and took a breath. "I saw everything," he said quietly. Keanu turned to face him. "I didn't recognize you at first," Laramie added, "but it wouldn't have changed how this should have gone." Marissa's head dropped slightly. Logan turned away. Laramie continued, speaking more to the staff than to Keanu now. "This store is about craftsmanship, legacy, and meaning, not just wealth. If we've forgotten that, then we've failed." He turned to Keanu. "You didn't just buy a watch today. You reminded us why we exist." Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He simply nodded. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing." Marissa stepped out from behind the counter, holding the bag as if presenting something sacred. She offered it to Keanu with both hands, then looked him in the eye. "I hope they feel what you felt when you chose it." "They will," Keanu said. He took the bag gently, like it carried more than metal and gears, like it carried memory. And before turning to leave, he looked once more at the display case, the same one where, just an hour ago, he had been mocked, judged, and dismissed. Now, that case didn't feel like a symbol of exclusion. It felt like a window to something much larger. As he walked toward the door, the store seemed to exhale. The weight of silence lifted, replaced by a quiet kind of reverence. A woman near the door murmured, "I'll never look at a watch the same way again." Marissa stood behind the counter, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes damp but steady. She watched the door close behind Keanu and whispered to herself, "I won't either." And for the first time in her career, she wasn't thinking about commissions or sales goals or brand image. She was thinking about time, about what it means to be seen, about how sometimes the most expensive thing in the room isn't the object, it's the lesson. The door chimed softly as it opened. No one paid attention at first. Marissa was still finishing the receipt with stiff hands, and Logan had found a reason to wander near the back counter, away from the growing tension. Keanu stood quietly, watchbox now closed in front of him. The atmosphere was delicate, like a glass balancing on its edge. Then a voice broke through, confident, clear, and friendly. "Keanu, man, I didn't know you were in town." Every head in the boutique turned. A tall man in a sharp navy suit strode in, sunglasses tucked into his blazer pocket, exuding the relaxed energy of someone used to being the most important person in the room. Dean Strauss, Hollywood producer, a man whose face graced Variety just last week and whose name opened doors on both coasts. Marissa's spine straightened like a pulled wire. Her fingers stopped mid-typing. Dean's smile widened as he walked straight to Keanu and clapped him on the shoulder with the casual warmth of old friendship. "What are the odds?" he laughed. "Last I heard, you were in Prague filming." Keanu smiled. "Wrapped a few days ago. Thought I'd drop by here before flying home." Dean looked around the store, then down at the box in Keanu's hands. His brows lifted slightly. "Picking up something special?" Keanu gave a soft nod. "A gift, for someone who made time precious." Dean's eyes softened for a beat. Then, with a quick glance around, he noticed the uncomfortable silence. Marissa stood frozen behind the counter, her mouth parted but no sound escaping. Logan was trying not to be seen. Dean's tone shifted. "Wait a second," he said, turning toward Marissa. "Do you know who you're talking to?" She didn't answer. Her lips moved slightly, as if trying to summon an excuse, but her voice was gone. Logan stepped forward, half defensive, half curious. "I mean, we didn't know he was—" Dean cut him off. "This guy once bought breakfast for our entire crew. Every day. For a week. No cameras, no posts. Just because the grip was having a hard time feeding his kids." He turned back to Keanu. "You remember that?" Keanu's face didn't change. "I remember the grip." Dean looked back at Marissa and Logan, then shook his head. "You two should be embarrassed." Keanu gently interjected, not out of anger, but to calm the storm he hadn't asked for. "It's all right." But it wasn't. Not anymore. Dean took a slow breath, his tone quieter now, but no less sharp. "No, it's not all right, Keanu. Because this isn't about who you are on a magazine cover. It's about how people treat each other when no one's watching." He looked at Marissa again. "Did you know who he was when you brushed him off?" Marissa stammered. I wasn't sure. I mean, he came in on a motorcycle, no appointment." Dean's expression darkened. "So that's how you decide who deserves respect." Marissa's gaze fell. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Dean said. "You don't need to know. That's the whole point." A few other customers had stopped browsing. One woman set down a watch she'd been admiring and crossed her arms. A young man near the entrance shook his head in disbelief. Dean turned to Keanu. "How long were you standing here before anyone even asked if you needed help?" Keanu hesitated, then offered a small shrug. "Long enough to see the espresso cart roll out." Marissa's cheeks flushed. She remembered pouring that espresso for Mr. Hargrove without even glancing back at the man by the door. She remembered how she had spoken to Keanu, dismissive, patronizing, and sarcastic. Dean looked down at the box in Keanu's hand. "What did you get?" Keanu opened the lid gently. Inside, the platinum timepiece glowed under the soft lights. Elegant, understated, eternal. Dean whistled low. "That's the big one." Keanu nodded. "For a boy who didn't get enough time." Dean blinked, surprised. "Want to tell me about it?" Keanu's voice dropped, calm but heavy with meaning. "There was a kid who visited set once. A quiet one. Terminal cancer. Didn't want selfies. Didn't want autographs. Just wanted to sit on a sandbag and watch the crew." Dean remembered now. "You mean Dylan?" Keanu nodded again. "He told me his dream wasn't to be famous. He just wanted to buy a real watch someday. One that would last longer than him." Dean's throat tightened. "Hell passed before he could," Keanu continued. "So I figured this watch would go to his family as a reminder that his time mattered." The room was silent. Even Logan, who had been shifting his weight and avoiding eye contact the entire time, had stopped moving. He stared at the display table in front of him, not really seeing it. Marissa pressed her lips together. Her eyes were glassy, hands clasped in front of her. She suddenly felt very small in her expensive shoes. Dean finally said, That's That's beautiful, man, and heartbreaking. Keanu closed the box, gently. He reminded me not to waste time judging people by what they wear when they walk in the door. The message wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it struck with more force than yelling ever could. Dean gave a slow nod. You're one of the few left who still get it. Keanu glanced toward Marissa, then Logan. I hope they do too. Dean turned back to the front. I'm serious, Marissa. If word gets out that this happened the way it did, your brand's going to get torched. Not because of a celebrity complaint, but because the world's tired of arrogance being the price of luxury. Marissa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her pride was gone. All she could do was bow her head slightly and say, I'm sorry. Keanu didn't move. He didn't nod or wave it away. He simply accepted it. The way someone accepts rain. Without resistance, without gloating. Dean sighed. Come on, man. Let me take you out for a proper lunch. No sales counters involved. Keanu picked up the watch box. I still need to send this first. Time sensitive? Dean chuckled dryly. Of course it is. As the two men walked toward the door, the rest of the boutique remained silent. Customers watched them pass. Some nodded in quiet recognition. Others looked down, ashamed they hadn't stepped in sooner. Marissa stayed behind the counter, the polished glass suddenly reflecting more than merchandise. It showed a reflection she wasn't proud of. Logan leaned closer and whispered, That really was Keanu Reeves. Marissa didn't reply. She just stared at the empty space where he'd stood, and for the first time that day, wondered who she had become. Mr. Laramie stepped out from the mirrored glass door at the back of the showroom. His polished shoes echoed against the marble tiles as he moved swiftly but silently toward the front. For the past 20 minutes, he had watched every second of the interaction from behind the two-ways mirror, and now, with the store on edge and all eyes frozen on Keanu Reeves, it was his moment to intervene. Mr. Reeves, he began, his voice composed but reverent. We are honored to have you here. Please allow me to personally complete your purchase. There was a slight shift in the room's energy, a pause where everyone seemed to breathe at once. Marissa stood stiff behind the counter, her posture suddenly small. Logan had all but retreated to the shadows near the wall display, and the few customers still lingering, especially Victor Hargrove, watched with cautious curiosity. But Keanu didn't smile. He didn't scowl either. Instead, he looked directly into Mr. Laramie's eyes with a calm, steady gaze. There was no anger in it, just depth, experience, and quiet truth. It's not about the sale, Keanu said gently. Mr. Laramie opened his mouth as if to reply, but stopped. Keanu continued. It's about how you treat people when you don't know who they are. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. The softness made the words louder than any outburst could. They hung in the air like a weight that couldn't be ignored. Mr. Laramie nodded slowly. You're right. He turned slightly toward Marissa, who hadn't moved. Her eyes were wide, and the color had completely drained from her face. Her hand still rested near the watch box, but she didn't touch it. She began, then swallowed. Mr. Reeves, I didn't know. I just thought... You already said it, Keanu interrupted, though his voice remained composed. Every time you dismissed me. Every time you assumed I didn't belong here. The words landed like a quiet gavel. Mr. Laramie turned toward Logan as well. Both of you, in my office, now! But Keanu lifted a hand, stopping him. That's not necessary, he said, though his eyes never left Marissa. This isn't about punishment, Keanu added. It's about learning, growth, reflection. Mr. Laramie hesitated. And if they don't learn? Keanu finally looked away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the sleek black wallet again, placing it gently on the counter. Then maybe the watch is the least expensive thing lost today. The room fell into complete silence. Even Victor Hargrove, who normally commanded attention wherever he went, didn't move. Dean Strauss remained respectfully quiet by the door. Mr. Laramie let out a quiet sigh, then stepped forward and picked up the paperwork. "Allow me to finalize this." Keanu nodded once. Marissa, still frozen, stared at the man she had ridiculed, a man who had responded with grace, depth, and dignity. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was beginning to understand. Mr. Laramie quietly took the receipt book from beneath the counter. His hands moved with careful precision, not out of formality, but from a desire not to waste a single second more. The air was thick with consequence, but not revenge. It was something deeper, something redemptive, if anyone had the courage to receive it. As he processed the transaction, Keanu looked out across the store. His gaze passed the polished cases, the high-end lighting, the crystal-clean glass. It was a store built to impress, but today it had been stripped bare by something money couldn't polish: truth. Marissa took a shaky breath. She finally managed to speak, not in defense, but in vulnerability. "Top. I made a mistake," she said, barely audible. "A big one." Keanu looked back at her. "Mistakes are human. Repeating them is a choice." She nodded, slowly. "I judged you. I thought, the leather jacket, the bike helmet, the way you came in, I thought you were wasting our time." "You thought I didn't belong," Keanu said, the words stripped of malice. "But belonging has nothing to do with appearances. It has everything to do with intention." Logan stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, I didn't mean to be rude either, I just didn't know." Keanu turned to him. "Why should you need to know someone's name to be respectful?" That landed even harder than before. Logan's lips parted, but no words followed. He dropped his gaze. Mr. Laramie gently slid the bagged watch across the counter. The box was wrapped with black ribbon, resting in a velvet pouch, untouched and pristine. "Mr. Reeves," the manager said with quiet sincerity, "this should have gone differently from the start, not just because you're who you are, but because no one should be made to feel less than human here. That's not who we are, or who we should be." Keanu gave a small, knowing nod. "Then prove it. Not to me, to every customer who walks in after I leave." Marissa blinked, the tears she had been holding back finally surfacing. She didn't try to hide them. She didn't try to save face. Instead, she whispered, "He told me his dream was to buy a watch, one that outlasted him. And here I was, treating it like a joke." Keanu let the silence speak for a few seconds. "That boy taught me more about time in 10 minutes than most people learn in 10 years. Then he turned to go. But before he could reach the door, Mr. Laramie spoke again. "Wait. One moment, please." Keanu turned slowly. The manager looked at his employees, then back at him. "Would you allow us the honor of framing your receipt on the wall?" Keanu considered that. "Only if you frame the whole story beside it." "Meaning?" Mr. Laramie asked. "Tell the truth. Tell what happened here. Tell how easy it is to misjudge someone, and how much harder it is to admit you did." It wasn't a brand moment. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a standard being set. Mr. Laramie gave a slow, deep nod. "We'll do exactly that." Keanu didn't say another word. He turned toward the door, watch in hand. But the echo of his message stayed behind, stamped not just on the receipt, but on the hearts of everyone in that store. The next morning, the world woke up to a storm it didn't see coming. Somewhere in the swirl of digital noise, a video surfaced. The footage was shaky but clear enough. A customer in the store had recorded the exact moment when Keanu Reeves stood calmly in front of the counter, being dismissed, laughed at, and quietly speaking words that carried more weight than a press conference ever could. The clip was less than 90 seconds long, but its impact was seismic. In it, Marissa could be seen smirking as she asked whether he could afford the platinum watch. Then came Keanu's quiet reply about families and time. His voice was measured, his presence calm, But it was the stillness in his eyes that people couldn't forget. That pause, that strength, that refusal to be baited into anger. It spread first on Reddit, then TikTok, then Instagram Reels. Headlines emerged overnight. Saleswoman laughs at Keanu Reeves. He quietly changes everything. Influencers shared it with captions like, "This is what grace under pressure looks like." Others simply wrote, "Class." Millions of views turned into tens of millions. Then it hit the mainstream outlets. Morning shows played the clip. Commentators replayed the exchange in slow motion. Podcasts discussed the symbolism of the moment. It wasn't just about celebrity. It was about dignity. It was about how people should be treated regardless of fame, wealth, or appearance. People began commenting things like, "He didn't say a bad word, but he said everything," and "That saleswoman just learned a lifetime's lesson in 30 seconds." By lunchtime, the store's name trended worldwide, but not for the reasons it would have hoped. The internet had already identified the store, pinpointed its location, and shared screenshots of its Yelp and Google reviews. The review pages were flooded with responses from people who had never stepped foot in the boutique, but felt like they had. "I wasn't there," one comment read, "but watching that clip made me feel like I was. Shameful treatment." Another simply said, "I used to want that watch. Now I want better people selling it." But what struck people most was Keanu's silence. He didn't post a statement, didn't tweet a reaction, didn't call for action or boycott. In fact, he said nothing at all, not a single word online, and somehow that only made the message louder. His silence wasn't passive, it was powerful. It let the moment speak for itself. By mid-afternoon, public relations representatives for the luxury watch brand released a brief statement. "We value every customer equally. The incident circulating online does not reflect our values, and we are in communication with the local retailer involved." It was careful, it was diplomatic, but it wasn't enough. Another wave of backlash followed. The luxury brand's Instagram was inundated with comments demanding accountability. "A billion-dollar watchmaker can't afford basic respect," one post read. "Maybe start with a mirror before you sell time." Some influencers who had partnerships with the brand announced they were stepping away. One YouTuber with 10 million subscribers said, "If your staff laughs at a man for asking questions about craftsmanship, that's not luxury. That's arrogance." Others followed suit, tagging the brand with hashtags like "luxury with dignity" and "time to change." Meanwhile, inside the boutique itself, Marissa had locked herself in the staff office. She had seen the video, she had read the comments. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the headlines. The playback on her phone repeated the moment over and over. Her smirk, his stillness, the words she had mocked now echoed across the globe. Logan stood at the register, his face pale. He didn't say much, but the silence between him and the rest of the staff was thick. Every time the door chimed, he flinched. The boutique had never felt this small, this exposed. Mr. Laramie paced his office, tie loosened, phone pressed to his ear. "We're reviewing internal protocols," he kept repeating to the corporate liaison. "Yes, I'm aware it's global now. Yes, we're drafting an apology. Yes, we're handling it." But the truth was, he couldn't. Not really. The internet doesn't wait for policy updates. It doesn't ask for permission. It decides. And what it decided was that this store had become a symbol of pride, of prejudice, and of what happens when you judge someone too quickly. Outside, news vans were parked across the street. A local reporter stood in front of the boutique's logo, giving a live update. In just 24 hours, this high-end watch store has gone from an exclusive shopping destination to the epicenter of a viral controversy. Social media erupted last night after a video surfaced showing beloved actor Keanu Reeves being dismissed by staff while inquiring about a luxury watch. The video now has over 80 million views. Inside, customers trickled in, not to buy but to witness. Some filmed quietly, others walked out in protest. One elderly man approached the counter, looked Marissa in the eye, and simply said, "You laughed at the wrong man." She couldn't respond. Her throat closed, her eyes glassed over, but no apology came. She knew it wouldn't matter. Not now. But not all the comments online were hostile. Some were reflective. One post that went viral read, "We've all been Marissa at some point, judging someone by their shoes, their silence, their haircut. But let this moment remind us, humility costs nothing, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the loudest story." Another added, "Keanu didn't clap back. He didn't shame her. He just stood there." And somehow, it changed everything. That more than anything became the core of the moment. It wasn't just about celebrity. It was about composure in the face of cruelty. It was about how we treat each other when no cameras are expected, when no fame is recognized, and when decency is a choice, not a performance. By evening, major media outlets picked up the story. "A masterclass in humility," read one headline. "When class meets cruelty," read another. One podcast host called it the most powerful moment of the year, and he didn't say 10 words. And still, Keanu remained silent. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't post cryptic captions or vague tweets. Instead, he was photographed later that day quietly visiting a children's hospital in another city. A staff member who recognized him whispered to a nurse, "That's the man from the video." The nurse replied, "That's the man who's been coming here for years, long before the video." The world watched, the world learned, and the boutique, its lesson had just begun. Marissa sat alone in the stark, windowless conference room. The air was still, almost heavy, like it hadn't been stirred in hours. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of a manila envelope that held her formal disciplinary notice unopened. The silence was interrupted only when the regional director entered, expression unreadable, clipboard in hand. He didn't sit. He didn't offer her a coffee or even a greeting. He just stood there, looking at her, not with anger, but with deep, exhausted disappointment. "You're not here because of a mistake," he said quietly. "You're here because of a pattern." Marissa blinked but said nothing. The director continued, "Let me be very clear. You didn't fail because you didn't recognize a celebrity. You failed because you didn't recognize humanity." The words hit harder than she expected. There was no raised voice, no dramatic lecture, just the cold, undeniable truth. He flipped open the clipboard. "There's a formal warning on record. You're on unpaid leave for 3 weeks, and before you return, if you return, you will complete a 40-hour mandatory training in empathy and service." Marissa's lips parted slightly, but she held back the urge to argue. She knew that anything she said would sound hollow, because the video didn't just capture a moment. It captured an attitude. The director closed the folder and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "People aren't just buying watches here. They're buying moments, stories, legacies. You forgot that. Don't forget it again." She nodded numbly. When he left, she remained in the chair, not because she was told to, but because getting up meant facing the floor and the people outside it. She wasn't ready. Back on the boutique floor, no one looked her in the eye. The same co-workers who once chatted with her about designer heels and influencer gossip now whispered in hushed tones behind polished display cases. Logan's station was empty. Rumor had it he'd been let go the morning after the video broke, quietly and without protest. Marissa tried to greet one of the newer associates by name. The woman gave her a tight nod and walked away. It was like living inside a fishbowl. She could see everything, but no one acknowledged her presence. That evening, she walked home in silence. No music in her earbuds, no phone calls. Just the sound of her own shoes against the pavement, echoing between the buildings. In the days that followed, her inbox filled with HR paperwork and automated training modules. She completed them all without complaint, though each one felt like a mirror she had to stare into longer than she wanted. One module asked her to list the last 5 people she judged unfairly based on appearance or speech. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. The list formed faster than she expected. It was humbling. But not performative. She didn't post an apology online. She didn't make excuses to the media. She didn't try to rewrite the narrative. Instead, she sat with it, quietly, alone. Then, 1 week after the incident, a small padded envelope arrived at her apartment. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in precise, firm lettering. Inside was a folded note. It read, "Everyone gets a moment to decide who they'll become. KR?" She read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't long, it wasn't grand, but it struck deeper than anything said in that meeting room, because it wasn't condemnation. It was invitation. To grow, to change, to become more than that one moment in the store. Marissa sat on her couch holding the note for a long time. The handwriting was calm, deliberate. There was no logo, no signature flourish, nothing to suggest celebrity or power, just a sentence. A sentence that didn't shame her, but reminded her that she still had a choice. She placed the note on her kitchen table and stared at it, as if it might change if she blinked. But it didn't. It just waited, like a mirror reflecting not who she had been, but who she might yet become. The next morning, she called the HR director not to contest the decision or negotiate terms, but to ask whether she could volunteer her time during her unpaid leave. The woman on the phone was silent for a moment, then said gently, "I think that's a good start." Marissa spent the next 2 weeks helping a local youth program in a lower-income neighborhood. She taught basic workplace etiquette, communication, and confidence to teenagers who had never set foot in a luxury store. They asked her questions about watches, about retail, but more often about how to handle judgment, rejection, and starting over. It was humbling and healing. One young girl asked, "Did you really laugh at Keanu Reeves?" Marissa paused, then answered honestly, "I did. Not because I knew who he was, but because I didn't bother to know who he might be." The girl nodded like she understood more than she let on. On her last day of volunteer work, the program director handed her a card signed by all the students. Inside, a message stood out in bold letters. "Thank you for listening." It made her eyes sting. When she returned to the store weeks later, the atmosphere was different. Not because people had forgotten, but because she had changed. She walked in without makeup, without her designer heels, and without the icy detachment she used to wear like armor. Mr. Laramie greeted her at the door. No speeches, just a firm nod. "You're back," he said. "I am," she replied quietly. "And I hope better." He gestured toward the employee lounge. "Clock in when you're ready." That day, Marissa didn't reach for her usual position behind the most expensive counter. She offered to assist with cleaning displays and shadowing new hires. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to earn the place she once assumed she deserved. Later that week, she found a folded paper in her locker. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Respect is not something you show when someone walks in wearing it. It's what you offer when you think no one's watching. Keep going. There was no name, no fanfare. But Marissa knew, and this time, she didn't cry. She smiled, because for the first time in a long time, she was becoming someone she could be proud of. Marissa stood in front of the mirror in the employee restroom. Gone were the dramatic curls and full contour makeup. Her hair was pulled back, simply, neatly. Her outfit was still the uniform, but this time it wasn't a performance. It was a role she had chosen to play with meaning. She looked down at her name tag and took a breath. Not because she feared judgment, but because today wasn't about her anymore. Today she would begin again, not by pretending, but by showing up with presence. The store was quiet when she entered. It was the early shift, before the luxury crowd strolled in with iced lattes and diamond-studded boredom. The scent of freshly wiped glass and citrus cleaner hung in the air. Everything gleamed, like the day was waiting to be handled with care. Marissa walked behind the counter and opened the drawer where her personal items were kept. Inside, right where she left it, was a small glass frame. Within it sat the folded note. Keanu's note. She hadn't changed a word or added anything. It was the original paper, carefully preserved behind the glass. Everyone gets a moment to decide who they'll become. It sat facing her, not the customers. She didn't need anyone to know it was there. It wasn't a badge. It was a compass. Her first customer that morning was an elderly gentleman with gentle hands and eyes that blinked often, like they were holding back emotion without even trying. He approached the counter with uncertainty, holding a worn-out leather wallet. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Is there anything I can help you find?" He smiled back, but hesitated. "It's my anniversary tomorrow. My wife passed last year, but I wanted to buy something for her anyway. I don't know if that's strange." Marissa didn't flinch. "No, sir. That's one of the most beautiful reasons to shop I've heard." The man blinked again, this time with purpose. She always loved watches, said they reminded her that love was measured not in years, but in moments. Marissa gently guided him to a display case filled with delicate timepieces, silver ones, rose gold, even a few vintage styles that felt timeless in more than just design. He pointed to one. "That one. It's simple, like her, but strong." They sat together at the counter while she explained the mechanics. He didn't care about automatic movement or Swiss engineering. He cared that the watch ticked softly, like a heartbeat, steady and warm. As she wrapped the box with care, he asked, "What made you get into this line of work?" He smiled thoughtfully. "I used to think it was about style. Then I thought it was about status. But now, I think it's about moments like this." He nodded with quiet approval. "Then you're doing it right." Marissa handed him the small black box, her hand steady. "Would you like me to write a card?" He pulled out a folded one from his pocket. "Already wrote it. Been carrying it for months. Just needed to find the right watch." As he walked out, she felt something stir. Calm, but deep. That moment hadn't just belonged to him. It had belonged to her, too. Later that afternoon, a young couple walked in. The woman was excited, practically bouncing beside her partner as they admired the sleek displays. Marissa noticed how his hand stayed resting gently on her back, steadying her joy, like he was grounding her in the moment. They were looking for an engagement gift, nothing extravagant, just something meaningful. Marissa listened as they shared their story. They had met during a delayed flight in Atlanta, sat next to each other, talked for hours. He gave her his number on a napkin, which she kept folded in her wallet to this day. Marissa guided them toward a collection of minimalist watches, pieces that were more about story than sparkle. She didn't rush them. She didn't upsell. She asked about what mattered. When they chose a piece with a simple brushed steel finish, Marissa offered to have the back engraved. "You've got space for about 6 words," she said softly. The woman grinned. "Let's do the napkin number." He looked at her, caught off guard, then laughed. "Are you serious?" She nodded. "It's how we started." Marissa beamed. "Then let's make sure it never fades." As she wrapped the watch, she noticed how her hands moved differently now. Not out of obligation, not with the mechanical precision of a job, but with care, as if this small act could carry weight beyond the box it sat in. They thanked her as they left, the woman turning back to say, "You're really good at this. You made it feel important." Marissa didn't reply with pride, just a soft, "Thank you for letting me be part of it." Later during her break, she sat alone in the staff lounge. No scrolling, no earbuds, no chatter. Just a cup of coffee and a moment to breathe. Oh. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Just a photo. Marissa, at 10 years old, standing behind a lemonade stand. In her hand, a cardboard sign that read, "Come as you are." She stared at it, smiling through a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Somewhere deep down, that little girl still lived. The one who once believed people were worth knowing, not judging. The one who thought time was something to share. When her break ended, she walked back to the showroom floor with a posture that was no longer about appearing confident. It simply reflected who she was becoming. The framed note still sat on her desk. She hadn't needed to look at it all day, but now she did. Just one glance. Just enough to remember that a single moment, handled right, could last longer than any timepiece ever made. That afternoon, when the last customer left and the showroom quieted again, Marissa stood still for a moment. Her smile lingered. Not for anyone watching, just for herself. The days that followed brought a quiet storm Marissa never expected. What started as an uncomfortable memory from a single morning now echoed far beyond the walls of the boutique. A well-known online news outlet picked up the video under the headline, "Saleswoman laughs at Keanu Reeves. He quietly changes everything." It wasn't clickbait. It wasn't mean-spirited. The article focused not on shaming, but on reflection. It detailed how Keanu had handled the situation with grace, and how he didn't lash out, didn't record a response video, didn't post a word. Instead, he left behind a lesson in stillness that said more than any rant ever could. The story spread fast. Commentators on morning shows dissected it. Business leaders discussed it. At first, it made Marissa shrink into herself. Every time she saw her own face blurred out in a screenshot, she braced for judgment. But something strange happened. People weren't pointing fingers the way she expected. They were talking about themselves. In comments and conversations, viewers began to ask, "Would I have done the same thing?" Or, "How do I treat people when no one's watching?" The story stopped being about Keanu or the boutique. It became a mirror. Educators started using it in character education classes, especially in middle schools and high schools. A group of 8th graders in Iowa wrote essays about the moment Marissa asked, "Seriously?" when Keanu tried to buy the watch. One student wrote, "That one word said everything, and he didn't yell, he just stayed kind. That's what I want to learn to do." Even corporate training departments got involved. A major hospitality brand built an internal seminar called The Reeves Moment, where employees were encouraged to reflect on how unconscious bias shows up in customer service. Marissa's former words, dismissive, impatient, performative, were quoted not to shame her, but to challenge others to examine themselves. Meanwhile, an international luxury watch brand, not the one from the boutique, but a respected competitor, released a limited edition model named Quiet Honor. The marketing was understated. No images of Keanu. No mention of the viral video. Just a brushed metal timepiece with a soft engraving on the back that read, "Time leaves a mark." Proceeds from the sales were donated to foundations supporting terminally ill children and their families. In the first month alone, the campaign raised over $1,200,000, 0 cents. One hospital that benefited was located in Santa Clara. Marissa, learning this through an internal newsletter, called the director quietly and asked if they needed volunteers. She didn't introduce herself by title. She simply offered time. They said yes. That weekend, she walked into the pediatric unit with a stack of handmade activity kits and a heart full of nerves. She didn't know what to expect, how the kids would react, or whether the staff might recognize her. But none of that mattered the moment she saw the first child's face light up at the sight of crayons and paper masks. She sat on the floor beside a 7-year-old named Daisy, who was coloring a unicorn. Daisy's IV line glowed gently beside her, but her focus never broke. She looked up once and asked, "Can you help me make the tail rainbow?" Marissa nodded, choosing purple with care. They worked side by side for 10 minutes in silence. Then Daisy looked at her name tag. Her lips parted just slightly. "You're the one he forgave, right?" Marissa froze. Her hand holding the crayon hovered mid-air. She hadn't expected the question, certainly not from a child. Her first instinct was to deflect, maybe even deny it. But something in Daisy's eyes stopped her. Something soft, curious, not accusatory, just truth. "Yes," Marissa whispered, barely audible. "That's me." Daisy gave a small, knowing smile and returned to her drawing without another word. She didn't treat her like a villain. She didn't bring up the video or ask for more. To Daisy, the story had already moved on. All that mattered was that someone had forgiven her, and she had accepted it. For the first time since the video went viral, Marissa felt something lift off her chest. It wasn't relief exactly. It was responsibility. A quiet call to live up to the moment that had changed her. That evening she stayed later than she needed to, helping nurses clean up and talking with parents who needed a few minutes to breathe. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply showed up. Over the next few weeks, her visits to the hospital became regular. No press, no cameras, just presence. Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Keanu's quiet action continued to spread in ways even he likely didn't know. A group of teenagers in Chicago created a campaign called Honor People First, encouraging classmates to compliment strangers on kindness, not status. One of their posters featured a watch drawn by hand with no numbers, just the words, "This moment matters." An executive at a major tech firm brought up the incident during a shareholder meeting, stating, "We need to be the kind of company that treats every customer like Keanu Reeves." Before we know it's Keanu Reeves. Even Logan, who had been let go after the boutique incident, resurfaced on social media a month later. In a short handwritten post, he admitted he'd been arrogant and lazy, more interested in status than sincerity. He ended the note with, "The man didn't shame me. He shamed the version of me I'd become. I'm changing that." Though the post didn't go viral, it was shared among friends and industry groups. Some scoffed, others reached out with offers to mentor or help him rebuild. All of this without Keanu saying a single word publicly. He never posted about the boutique, never named the brand, never gave an interview. But his silence spoke volumes. And in its echo, lives quietly shifted. Marissa often sat at her desk between customers, now with a different kind of attention. Not toward luxury or power, but toward the small cues others gave. The tremble of a hand, the wear in someone's shoes, the way someone hesitated before asking a question. It wasn't pity, it was awareness. She still wore the name tag, same as before, but now it carried a different meaning. Not a badge of position, a symbol of choice. The store lights were dimmer now, the buzz of the viral moment replaced by a hush that felt like reverence. Behind the scenes, people were still talking. Online, the clip had surpassed 5 million views in just 3 days. But inside the store, where it had all started, a sense of quiet introspection remained. No banners, no plaque. Just a subtle shift in the way people treated one another. And through it all, Keanu Reeves never gave a statement. He didn't clarify. He didn't gloat. He didn't accept interviews or endorsements. He had simply walked into a store, experienced judgment firsthand, and responded in a way that would ripple across the globe. Not with fury, but with grace. A few days later, a radio host summed it up best in a segment that was shared thousands of times. Keanu didn't raise his voice, the host said. He didn't call for heads to roll. He didn't shame anyone publicly. He just stood there, quietly. And somehow, his silence spoke louder than 1,000 angry tweets. That's power. That's character. In classrooms across the country, teachers played the footage and asked students what they saw. Not just the viral video, but the full arc, from dismissal to revelation to humility, from impulse to redemption. One high school ethics teacher in Chicago wrote a single question on the whiteboard. When nobody's watching, Who are you really? The story became a case study in leadership workshops. CEOs used it to remind teams about unconscious bias. Retail companies distributed internal memos, reminding staff to treat every customer with dignity, regardless of their appearance. GM heads of American Affairs, and back at the boutique, something unexpected happened. Marissa stayed. It would have been easy to quit, to run from the embarrassment, the judgment, the whispers, but she didn't. She kept showing up, kept taking the humility training, kept her head down, not in shame, but in reflection. One afternoon, a customer stood at the glass counter, admiring a modest silver watch. Marissa approached, patient and gentle. The customer hesitated, unsure of the price. She didn't pressure. She didn't rush. She just listened. When the customer finally decided to purchase it, Marissa handed over the bag with both hands and a sincere smile. As the door closed behind him, the store manager nodded toward her. "That's the best sale we've had all day." And it wasn't about the price tag. Back in her apartment, Marissa kept Keanu's note in a small acrylic frame beside her mirror. She read it every morning before tying her hair back. Everyone gets a moment to decide who they'll become. That moment had come for her in the form of a quiet man in worn clothes. And though she hadn't recognized him then, she saw him clearly now. A man who never needed to raise his voice to change a room. A man who knew that power wasn't in appearance, but in restraint. And a man who believed that time, real time, wasn't measured in seconds, but in significance. Months later, the boutique still carried a quiet reverence, not because of who had once walked through its doors, but because of what had been left behind. Customers were treated with more kindness. Team meetings began with reminders about grace and empathy. New employees heard the story not from corporate training, but whispered over lunch breaks, shared like a sacred cautionary tale. Marissa, once impatient and dismissive, now trained others, not with lectures, but with example. She remembered what it felt like to be judged, and more painfully, what it felt like to judge. She no longer looked at worn jackets or scuffed shoes as signals of worth. She looked people in the eye. She listened. One day, a teenage girl wandered into the store. She wore an oversized hoodie and nervous eyes. Her hands trembled as she asked about a watch. Just to look. Her voice cracked as she said she probably couldn't afford it. Marissa knelt beside her. "You don't have to buy anything, but if you love it, you deserve to admire it." The girl smiled, and Marissa smiled back. Across the street, a small bakery had taped a photo of Keanu Reeves on their window, right next to a handwritten quote. "Character is revealed not in how you treat the powerful, but in how you treat the invisible." The quote spread. It showed up on billboards, mugs, t-shirts. It wasn't officially licensed, but no one tried to profit from it either. It felt more like a movement than a moment, a quiet revolution. One brand, a luxury watchmaker never mentioned in the viral video, released a limited edition timepiece engraved with the phrase, "Quiet Honor." They didn't feature Keanu's name or image, just the message. All proceeds went to children battling terminal illness. The watches sold out in hours. Marissa heard about it while volunteering at a pediatric hospital, one of the charity's beneficiaries. She wasn't there because of punishment or pressure. She was there because something inside her had changed. A nurse motioned her over. "There's a little boy who wants to meet you. He saw your name tag." Marissa stepped into the room. The boy was maybe 10, pale, fragile, but smiling. He whispered as she came closer. "You're the one he forgave." Her breath caught. He didn't say Keanu's name, but he didn't need to. The boy's eyes said it all: gratitude, wonder, belief. She sat beside him, holding his hand, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by beeping monitors and the scent of antiseptic, Marissa finally understood the depth of the ripple Keanu had created, not just in her life, but in the lives of strangers she'd never meet. In a child whose only connection to the story was a whispered name and a sense that even the coldest moments could melt into compassion. In another city, a barista placed a folded note in a tip jar with the words, "You never know who's watching." At an airport lounge, a tired executive paused before snapping at a server, took a breath, and softened his tone. In homes and hearts, something had shifted. Keanu never posted about it, never spoke about it, but in a world hungry for loud voices and viral noise, it was his silence that echoed the longest.